Welcome to the ClassCast Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. Today, we'll be speaking with Peter Hubbell, the CEO of ApplyU, a new company which applies Madison Avenue branding and storytelling techniques to help graduates market their way to their first job. I got in touch with Peter recently because I thought that this is a really interesting concept, taking some marketing strategies and applying it more to the human side, where we're not necessarily selling a product. We're helping students to sort of sell themselves in a way to future employers, right? To create some interest. And given that we're right around the time where we've got, college graduations going on and all that, it seems like an ideal time to have this conversation. So Peter, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today. How you doing?
Great, Ryan. How about you? Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, doing really well. Like I said, busy time of year for a lot of people, and it sounds like very busy for you, obviously, as you're launching the new company. I sort of went with sort of a standard tagline there, generalizing the services you're providing, but I'm sure that's not enough detail. Can you tell us a little bit more about ApplyU and the specific work you're doing?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Just as quick background, I am a career advertising person. I've been in the business. My career is measured at this point in decades, not years, but working at many large global agencies with blue chip clients like Procter and Gamble, et cetera. About 10 or 11 years ago, I left that world and started my own agency dedicated to baby boomers. And we've become the world's leading experts in marketing to age, which has been a great niche for us and trying to bring some dignity and respect to people of age. I've written a couple of books along the way. And so it's brought me to this juncture here after 40 years of learning the skills that one does in Madison Avenue and leveraging those on behalf of clients, that I started to get more legacy focused, started to be more purpose driven, and said, what can I do with all of that experience that would be, more admirable than selling people things they might not necessarily want to buy. And I've had this idea for ApplyU for about 15 years. It's been on the back burner, and two things happened that created a bit of a tipping point for me. The first was how quickly we might forget, right, with the pandemic sort of blurring our recent past. But the OK Boomer phenomenon really gnawed at me. This notion of intergenerational strife. Here I am, a baby boomer who's led a long and successful life, and is proud of the fact that I have wisdom that I've gleaned along the way that I can share with others, especially young people. And the very people that I would hope to advantage by sharing what I've learned the hard way and the easy way over the course of a long life are saying, okay, boomer. So that sort of stuck in my craw a little bit. And then during the pandemic, opening the newspaper every day and reading about the job-eating virus and how hard it was going to be for particular sectors of the business world, but especially college graduates. So we had a lot of people graduate last year who did not get jobs. They're going to be adding to the 4.5 million who are graduating next month. So I said, get this ApplyU idea off the back burner, get it on the front, and turn up the heat. But basically what ApplyU is leveraging, as you said, top line, leveraging what we do on Madison Avenue and in marketing to help kids create their own personal brand, right? We all know what brands we love and relate to and are loyal to beyond reason, but we seldom think of ourselves as brands. So we're going to leverage that in practical workshops that take many different forms. They could be, private tutor type sessions, one-on-one. They could be group sessions. But the fundamental foundational belief in ApplyU is that the prevailing approach to the job application process is predicated on the belief that you need to be better than the other applicants. So you get somebody that comes out of a top-notch school, has great internship experience, has put together a cogent resume, and they say, well, I'm better than the other candidates because I have all these three things that are better. And then they go in and they sign up to answer the same interview questions that their competitors are answering, and thinking that if I can answer them, more intelligently and better, then the better person will win the job. And what a Madison Avenue perspective gives you is, it's not sufficient to be better. You have to be different better. Madison Avenue isn't just ads for the Super Bowl. It's about understanding the power of differentiation.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that's sometimes a tough sell, I think, for people in general, but especially for young people who've maybe gone through school, and especially thinking about, say, students who've gone to your selective or more elite universities and things like that, or even your top students at, say, your smaller schools or bigger state schools. My students, I teach 11th and 12th grade, English, and they're so hyper competitive, especially the kids in the upper level classes, that they really believe they have to have everything on their resume. Like, I have so many kids who are not to knock it. National Honor Society is fine, but I have so many kids who are in it who don't want to be. They just think that if I don't have that line on my resume and everyone else has it, I'm at a disadvantage. And I always try to explain to them, like, but everyone has it, so it doesn't really matter. If it was literally only, the 20 brightest kids in your graduating class, that's fine. But there's so many kids in it. If you don't like it, don't do it. Use your time to something you do care about and get great at that, because that would be a better line on your resume. That's a really difficult thing to tell a 17 or an 18-year-old who has been sort of brought up with this mindset that I have to be competitive. I need these test scores. I need the rest. And I can't imagine that much changes between high school graduation and college graduation. As you've started, reaching out to students, as you're launching the service, are you getting that kind of response? Like, do you feel like students are they hesitant about it? Like, do they believe, like, well, look at my grades, look at my internships, that's enough? Or are you seeing people who are open to the idea that, creating a great personal story might be an equalizer in this situation? Like, how are the clients responding?
Yeah, the clients are the ones who have had this realization, right? So they're stepping up because they have awareness of the fact that they need an advantage. But no, you are absolutely spot on. By and large, most of the people rolling out of college think they've got it, right? I've got this. I've always gotten good grades. I've checked all these boxes. I just have to figure out what career I want to go into, and then nail that interview, and I'll be fine, right? But here's this other little thing that goes on that, again, so I always say to them, tell me about your experience applying for your first real job after college. Oh, you're doing it for the first time. I see. Okay. They don't realize that, maybe they'll do well in the first interview, or maybe they'll do well in the second interview. So they make a couple cuts, right? But when you're down to the final round, guess what? Everybody you're up against is as good as you. Right. So back to the power of differentiation, the person who's going to get that job is likely going to be the person who elevated or separated themselves from the other people. They differentiated themselves in some way. They had an interesting story to tell. Right. So at the heart of what we do is storytelling. And when that story comes from an authentic place, you can speak to it passionately. So you come across brimming with confidence. And when that story checks the boxes of being relevant to the company you're interviewing with, then you're really going to put it over the top. Oh, that's a story of leadership, or that's the story of your agility and creative problem solving, or that's a story of your perseverance. Those are all qualities we're looking for. So yeah, they do, to your question, they do. Most people do have that orientation of, I've got this.
Yeah. And you never want to reduce confidence. I always say there's nothing sexier than confidence, but at the same point, confidence alone isn't going to get you the job in most cases when there are other qualified candidates. Now, thinking about, you sort of gave us a quick business background, but just so that the audience knows a little bit about you, I personally think it's really important, if you're going to talk to someone on a specific subject, in this case, education, we should always sort of be aware of previous experience. So for you, your education, like, what kind of student were you K through 12, or how did you do in college? And maybe how do those experiences, how have they either influenced your career or maybe influence the current endeavor?
Well, I should as a way of background, I should say that one of the books I wrote about marketing to age is called Getting Better with Age. And I drew an analogy to things that get better with age, and memories get better with age. And the reason memories get better is every time you tell a story from the past, you're not recalling the original version of the story. You're recalling the version that you told last. So you start putting layers of positive varnish on it. So the old joke about the older you get, the better you used to be. So if you ask me today about my academic history, I would have to say it was all about prowess. But no, it's I grew up outside New Haven in sort of the shadow of an Ivy League school, and was fortunate to live in a town with a strong school program. And I was one of those National Honor Society people. And but I was also into athletics, so I was always the person that was winning the school awards for best of athletics and best of academics at the same time. And maybe during this interview, we can talk about my thoughts on that and how that parlays into the future of education in terms of those two things being married. But I wanted to go to a small Ivy League like school, but not something big like Yale or Columbia. So I gravitated towards the small Ivy like schools in New England and ended up at Trinity College. Worked really, really hard and decided I didn't really love it as much as I thought I might. And I applied to Stanford and got into Stanford transfer. And I said, okay, now you've got a choice, Peter. And I stuck it out at Trinity, and I'm glad I did. It got me on a great path, but I've often wondered where my life would have gone if I had gone the other way. But I think, what I would tell all of the listeners here is you have to follow your heart. And my heart said, this is a great school to be at. It's the right size for you. It's strong academics. Don't be a prima donna and want to go to the elite school just because you got in. So, but I had a great education, and I rolled right out of that with a BA in economics right into the advertising business.
That's awesome. Yeah. And that's actually advice I find myself giving a lot is just because a school is better on paper doesn't mean it's the better school for you. I also, I went to James Madison in Virginia. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and I almost transferred out after freshman year. And I killed it first semester. So, I didn't like my roommate. So I was like, whatever, I'm gonna do all my homework, and I got in everywhere I applied. And then I was like, well, what am I going to do? And I thought about it. I was like, actually, I like it here. I just don't like my roommate. Like, we got to, settle this down. And so now I find myself telling students, it's not necessarily what the school is on paper. It's what it is to you, which maybe in a certain way, brings back to the idea of how you create sort of a personal brand. In some ways, it doesn't purely matter who you are on paper, the resume itself. It's what what you provide to your potential employer and things like that. As we think about students making this transition, right? You're focused on people who have just gone through, say, that experience. They've been through K through 12. We're thinking about mostly successful people. They're graduating college. They're looking for their first job, and you're providing a service that's going to help them in that process. But before they get there, we're hoping that the education itself was useful. We're hoping we're doing more than just, padding stats and building a GPA. There should be something more that comes with it. And so before we get into maybe some of the details of what Apply U does, and I do like the idea of sort of circling back to the athletic academic sort of interplay there. But before we get into any of those details, in a really sort of broad philosophical sense, what do you think is the purpose of education? Like, as we do it in the United States, going through K through 12, going to undergrad, what are we really trying to accomplish, or what should students be trying to gain from that experience before they come to you and seek your services?
Yeah, I won't be the first person to answer a question of that nature, nor the last. It's a pretty heady topic, but I would answer it in one word, which is potential. I think that's taking advantage of what's out there to achieve your full potential, and I wouldn't complicate it any more than that. I'm 61. When you talk about what is education, I have the benefit of my own educational experience. I have the benefit of being a person who believes that my education didn't stop when I left college, that if you want to grow, you have to continue to learn. And so that's always, whether that's reading or challenging myself. So to me, education is an ongoing thing. And when we define it as something associated with an academic institution, I think we do ourselves an injustice in the process. But I think that I experienced education as a parent of 3 children. I've experienced what education looks like through all the different routes that my children have taken. But then I was also an educator at one point, not in a school, but I was a hockey coach, and I was in an elite program in the state of Connecticut that was run by a former NHL star. Kids who played in that program have since gone on to play in the NHL. So this was a pressure cooker environment, right? And all of the parents were about, well, we have to win, we have to go to regionals, and we have to go to the nationals, and win. And I would tell I had a message for the parents, which they didn't necessarily like, but at the end of the season, it sank in. And I had a message for the boys. The message for the parents was, I'm open for anything as the educator of your children. I'm open for anything that you have to contribute that helps me do a better job at that. But here's what I'm focused on. At the end of the season, I'm going to give you back a better hockey player and a better boy. You can call me any time of the night. I don't want to hear about what happened on the ice and why you think Junior didn't get as much ice time as he deserved, or why did he get benched. You don't know what's going on that bench. He probably said something rude to a teammate, which there has to be accountability, right? Which they don't. They're on the other side of the ice. So they're just judging things based on what they see. And the coach is the one who's closest to what's going on, right? So I'd offer that message to them, and they would thank me at the end of the season, because a better boy is a big, big part of why you should be doing athletics. And I'm just saying boy because that was the nature of the program at the time. It was all boys. And then, my message for the players was, I don't care what the expectations are for you. I don't care what your mom and dad are telling you need to do or be. All I ask of you is that you go as far as you can with all that you have. So back to me saying that potential is how I define education. Go as far as you can with all that you have. So if you're holding back and you're not putting full effort into it, you're not taking advantage of the practices, you're not taking advantage of the power skate sessions first thing in the morning before school, right? You're not giving it everything you have. And if you come up short and you're not the first line player that you wanted to be, that's okay, because you took what the good Lord gave you and you worked as hard as you could at it. And that's a bit of my story. I grew up on a dairy farm, and I've had a global career, in New York City. So that's just because I guess I embraced that philosophy subconsciously without realizing it until I became an educator.
That's great. That's great. And as a teacher, and I've coached in the past. I coached high school softball and I coached varsity golf for a while. I'm now coaching my kids' t-ball team, which is similar in theory but different.
All that free time you have, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I don't sleep. No, but I think that's important. I mean, that's really what I tell people in my classroom, is that if we all do our jobs well, you will walk out of here a better communicator, a better reader, thinker, writer, and speaker. And if I hand you the right things to read and to talk with your classmates about, you'll be a better person. And we can each define what that actually means a little bit differently. We don't have to have the exact same agreement on what makes a person, good or whatever. But if you leave this class and you're not better in those areas, then you or I or both of us have failed. And so, yeah, I mean, the idea of reaching someone's potential or helping someone to reach their potential, I think is huge. And I think, to a certain extent, that is obviously what schools are trying to do. We could probably argue about the efficacy of some of the programs that we have in place to do it. But I think for the most part, people's hearts are in the right places. And then we have to start thinking about the practice. So let's take that idea of potential and steer it back towards your work and apply you. If someone has gone through their, what would be up to about 17 years of education or something, right? Like, we go through K through 12, we do undergrad, looking for that first job. We've got someone who has worked hard to achieve their potential in whatever fields, endeavors they've chosen, and they're now looking at their first job. Okay. When you start working with someone, what's the opening conversation like? Like what's the initial sort of pitch or the opening session kind of look like to help that person understand the work they're about to do?
Yeah, it starts with one of the most popular interview questions out there. Tell me a little bit about yourself, right? And we're sort of teeing them up, right? And we've got parents there at the same time if they want to be part of that initial consultation. And usually, using myself as an example, hi, my name, I'm Peter. I went to Trinity College. I'm an economics major, and I'm looking for a job in the advertising business. Okay, well, you didn't tell me anything more than I could have read on your resume, right? So tell me a little bit about yourself is a great opportunity for you to change the Q&A dynamic, right? Which is, going into an interview and trying to answer questions effectively that you can't anticipate is not a strategy. So we say at an early stage here with the children and their parents, right? It's not about getting a job. You have to win a job, right? And if you want to win the same way a sports team wins, you need a strategy and you need tactics, and you need to go out there and execute them better than the other person, right?
Yeah.
So it's fundamentally what we do. And then we say, all right, we're gonna take all those things that you've been told that you think are tried and true, and we're going to tell you they're tired, right? The typical approach of build experience, put it on a resume, apply to companies you want to work for, interview, and then come home and wait for an answer, which I call hope. Hope is not a strategy. We're going to take that model and throw it out the window. And instead, we're going to replace it with a model where build experience might not be a internship, right? What if you just went and did something really, really interesting during one summer that gave you something interesting to talk about or made you a more interesting person? So back to the person who's going to get the job is not the better person, it's the person who's different better. And if you did really interesting things with your free time, not only would that make you more interesting, it's the basis for a story that can be really engaging and get you out of that question and answer dynamic. So a typical person comes out of Apply U and they get that softball question. They know it's coming. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Well, my name's Mike, but my friends call me the Moses of college hockey. Moses of college hockey. I can't say I've ever met the Moses of college hockey. Tell me more. Then boom, you're off to the races. Now you have control of that interview. You didn't steal control, right? You got invited to tell your story. And now that's a story that Apply U helped you write. It's a real world story about something that happened to you when you were the captain of your hockey team in college. And before you know it, you've got that interviewer wrapped around your finger because when you answer an interview question, you answer a question with a bunch of words that is information, right? The brain is conditioned to filter out information, to only find the most vital information, right? Walk down the street, we're bombarded by, there's a telephone pole, there's a hot dog vendor, look out, person walking towards you, up, don't step on the crack, right? We filter all that out so we can actually function. And if you're being asked if this interviewer is asking the same questions over and over and over, she's heard the same answers over and over and over. And if all you're doing is answering them the same way, right? That's information, she filters it out. Along comes the Moses of college hockey. Now he's got a story. He's got a story that has meaning. Now he's going to be remembered. So it's really no more complex than that. We should probably talk at some point. It does have a self-discovery element to the workshop, which is critical to building a brand story. But I also think it's critical to a student of any age to really learn more about themselves and be self-reflective.
Yeah, and that's great. I was thinking that recently read a book called The Tyranny of Merit by Michael Sandel. He's a professor at Harvard. It's fantastic. Highly recommend it. But he makes the argument that there should sort of be like a threshold of sort of minimum qualifications. So you think about trying to apply to Yale or Stanford or Harvard. He's like, you get to a point where, everybody's grades are perfect, or, you're within a fraction of each other. Your test scores are perfect. You're within 20 points. Like, he goes, there's really nothing that's going to differentiate most of these students. And so as much as no one wants to admit it, he's like, there's a high degree of chance in this admission process. And so his argument was essentially they should just define what is the minimum threshold to be qualified, and then throw everybody in and just make it a lottery. If you were good enough to make the lottery, then it's a lottery. And at least we're being honest and saying, hey, there's a high degree of chance here, just like before. And I think that when we're thinking about maybe a job application or really any interview, even say an interview for college admissions, you sort of recognize that there's this minimum qualification that I've met. Now, what do I do with this interview? And the whole point of the interview is to differentiate yourself from everyone else. And to your point, I can't say the same things. And so if I'm meeting the threshold of qualification, like everybody else who's going to go in and do this job interview, then what else is there? Having the extra 0.2 on my GPA isn't probably meaningful to the person who's hiring you so much as, what kind of person are you? Do you seem hardworking? Are you creative? Do we like you? Like, we're going to have to work with you. Do we want you here? And so I have this conversation a lot. I do a lot of college admissions essay tutoring. And so I'm curious, sort of why focus specifically on college? Because a lot of what you're saying, very, very similar to conversations I have with high school juniors and seniors as we're getting into the application process, just to get them into college. You say, hey, we need to tell a story. This admissions counselor is going to read 200, 300 essays in this day. How is yours any different from the other 199 of them? And so we think about that story. For you, what made the sort of the college graduate market most appealing as the place to launch Apply U?
Well, you're spot on, right? There's universality to what we're offering. And there's no doubt that if you're midway through your career and you're disrupted and you're looking to pivot and reimagine yourself, that what we have to offer could be very, very helpful to you. It's also, for people interviewing for our school, private schools or colleges who are, they're interviewing. They should be thinking about themselves as different, better, not just better. The reason we focused on college was, we have to start somewhere, and one of the disciplines of marketing is making strategic choices and being focused. And as you build a brand, build it on a foundation, and make sure that foundation is a solid one before you go vertical with it. And the college graduate aperture is what we refer to it as, is a good one, because there's tension there, right? I had an education from K through senior year of college that was very linear, right? I knew what was coming next. The subsequent grade was coming next. I knew what I was majoring in. I knew what coursework I needed to take. Now, suddenly, that linearity of my education doesn't match up with what I want to do as a career. So what is it about biology and calculus and economics that's going to make me a really good person in the advertising business? So there's tension in the college graduate. There's pressure on the college graduate. I've spent all these years to be successful. I'm measuring myself against my peers. If my peers have jobs and I don't, what did I do wrong? And then there's tension for the parents, right? The parents they want the best for their children. That's any good parent wants that. They've invested heavily in a college education, but the reality is, they're not being taught the skills they need to get a job at college. And so we say you're still one class short of your first job, and that class isn't taught on campus. And there's the other dynamic too, which is, if you're a parent that's written a lot of big checks and your child still doesn't have the job that they deserve, or back to go as far as you can with all that you've got, then you're just going to write another small check, and it's probably the best check you ever wrote when it comes to the end result. So we just felt that aperture had a lot of interesting things going on. It allows us to market to something very specific, market to the campuses, market to the fraternity and sorority organizations that want the best for their graduating seniors, et cetera.
Smart, yeah, and I like the way you explain it too, because it would be difficult to sell the same service freshman year of college, because you're still of the mindset that your student, or that if you are the student, you're going to do this on your own through whatever your coursework, your internships, everything else. But if you're graduating and the job isn't already there, right? Now it's like, would I pay for a speed boost in a race at the beginning? No, because I think I can win it. But if I'm getting close to the end and I'm not sure, like all of a sudden now's the time to look for that. Give me now I'll take the help, because I see that it's going to be really useful to me. So you said that one of the first things you do is sort of this self-discovery piece. And I'm just curious, because so much of the criticism that I think is levied towards formal education, whether it's higher ed or K through 12, is that things tend to get, in certain ways, maybe very standardized. We think about the testing, or, we think about, the content in the classroom and things like that. And I think it's in some cases it's fair. I think people maybe overblow it a little bit, but I've heard a lot of people say they don't think there's enough personal development going on in schools. Like, we're not thinking about the person, we're thinking about getting through your curriculum and, your syllabus and checking boxes. So when you start thinking about that self-discovery and this increasing a young person's awareness of who they are and what they do have to offer, how does that conversation go? Like, what do you do to pull those answers out, and how do young people respond?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the company is called Apply You because it's all about you, right? We are here to help you discover what your you is, and to help you learn the tactics you need to apply it in an interview situation, right? So very literal in that way. But there's a section of the workshop there, the page comes up. It's that great Dr. Seuss set of words, which is nobody's youer than you, right? From Happy Birthday to You. And the reality is, your you is that special thing that makes you different, right? And that special thing that makes you different is also that special thing that makes you great, right? And we all have it. We just don't know that we have it. We don't know where to look to find out that we have it. And I really wish for the success of Apply You, so that we can get on to some of these other cohorts that can benefit from it. Because we've had quite a few, especially some of our younger people, when we were doing our beta test, we did it with kids at all different grades in college. And a lot of them said, boy, I wish I had taken the self-discovery a long time ago, because it's not so much about getting a job, it's about understanding who I am, how to think of myself in terms of the choices I make in learning, how to think about the context of my life and who I am, and so on and so forth. And there's no doubt that it's always been hard as a teenager to navigate these challenging years of growth and so forth, but it's especially hard now, right? And anything that we can do to help you understand what your thing is. My 15-year-old, if we didn't help him promote his thing, his thing would be sitting in front of the computer. His thing is skiing, right? And we've invested a ton of time as a family, and he gets great confidence and self-esteem out of that. So we focus and apply you on the you, and there's two self-discovery tools. One is personal, and the other is professional. And these are sort of what puts the science behind the art of creating your personal brand. And they're 10 simple questions. So I'll give you for instance, one of the questions on the personal survey is, when on my vacation, I like to blank. Right? So pretty simple question, nothing intimidating about this survey. And so a typical workshop participant would say, when I'm on vacation, I like to read. Say, okay, that's good, but we're not going to accept that answer because we're going to keep asking ourselves why. Why do you like to read? Or what do you read? Well, I read books about things I know nothing about. Okay, why do you read books you know nothing about? Well, because I like to learn and grow. All right, good. Why do you like to learn and grow? Well, when I learn and grow, my mind thinks differently. Okay, what's good about your mind thinking differently? Well, it opens up new possibilities. We said, good. We started with reading, and we got to, you're a person who's very focused on opening up new possibilities.
So when you're on vacation, you're opening new possibilities. That's certainly a better story than reading, right?
What did you do on vacation? I came up with a really cool idea of what I want to do with my life, right?
Yeah.
Because vacation is a time to clear your head and to have a meeting with yourself, and discover what your real drivers are. Right. And then there's 9 more questions like that. And then on the other side, there's 10 more questions like that get at these. We call those, by the way, the personal ones, we call them the interests that make you interesting. So back to this, we're going to differentiate you. One of the ways we're going to differentiate you is to make you more interesting and memorable to that interviewer. Because to your point, we've got to work with this person, right? We want to like this person. We want the people who have not met him before we hire him to like him. And then the professional survey are called the skills that make you skillful.
Nice. Yeah. And I think all of these would probably be things, as maybe some of your clients have pointed out, man, I wish I'd have thought about this sooner. I'll never forget when you said that, I thought of this. Pre-pandemic, I do a couple of free presentations at public libraries each year where hey, here's an hour of the best advice I can give you on your admissions essays or some SAT prep, just help out people who can't afford tutoring. It gets my name out there. It's whatever. And I did a session a couple of years ago, and all the kids looked really young, and I asked, and they were all freshmen in high school. I was like, what are you doing here? This is about how to write an admissions essay. Like, there's like 5 stressed out parents who are here to get information to help their kid. And there's 3 freshmen. I'm like, what are you doing? And they're like, well, we just figured it'd be good to, know what's going to happen. So we can, yeah. And I was like, holy crap, and they asked some great questions. The one girl's like, so should I start writing it now? And I was like, no, you haven't done anything yet. She goes, well, I do keep a diary. Is that good? And I was like, actually, yeah, it's fantastic, right? Because you have this great like wealth of knowledge of yourself. You have all this material you could potentially pull from, but you're getting more comfortable talking and thinking about yourself. And so, some of this, I'm sure you've already found that some people are way more comfortable in that conversation than others. Like whether you actually know a lot about yourself in some of these deeper ways probably doesn't matter. It's just how comfortable are you in thinking about yourself? That personal reflection can be very difficult for some people. As you work through your process, and as it transitions from the discovery to creating the story, sort of that personal branding element, when it comes time to actually put this into practice, rubber meets the road, how much interview prep do you provide? Like, do you do a lot of mock interviews with them, or is this really about sort of providing the stuff and then allowing them to work through the final legs on their own? Like, what's the finishing touch?
Yeah, it's you hit it. It's giving them the stuff, giving them the tools, right? Now, I have no doubt that we're going to encounter some parents along the way who have kids who need to have a story, need to differentiate themselves, but just can't get it done. And I'm going to be asked, well, can you help them create a story? And I'm reluctant to do that because, so I'll go back to everybody has their thing, right? I'm not going to accept that you don't have a thing that makes you different, better, right? We all have it. We just need to discover it, right? So the discovery tool is fabulous, and everybody discovers a thing. But in terms of the storytelling and everything, that what we want that to come from an authentic place, right? We don't want to spoon feed it to them so it becomes rehearsed, right? We know a big part of interviewing is to come across as confident and in charge and in control. When you tell that story, hopefully just listening to me here, my whole story of founding this company, I'm passionate about it. I'm proud of it, right? It hopefully it is something that you can feel that emotion in my words, right? And that's what we're trying to get at with these kids, get to a level of confidence and comfort. They don't, it's interesting. You said selling themselves earlier. There is a big reluctance to sell yourself in an interview. They believe that they are overstepping their bounds. I'm supposed to go in there and have good posture and wait for them to ask the questions because they're in control. And then I have to answer that question well, as opposed to walking into an interview. Hey, so how are you today, Peter? I'm great. You're never going to believe what happened to me last week. Right? Why not? Your whole goal is to try to somehow shift that dynamic from asking questions you can't predict and can't control to things you can control. And we use the word pitch. You get to pitch that story. You get to sell yourself, and you're not selling yourself by saying, well, I think you should hire me because I'm better than all the other candidates and I'll prove it to you. No, you tell a really engaging, interesting story about yourself. Stories are meaningful. Stories are memorable. They have narratives. We teach them the art of storytelling based on what Hollywood does, right? You've got to build in conflict. It has to have an arc. You have to, oh my God, it was the second act curtain. It was the hero was never possibly going to recover from their setback. Done for. Curtain goes down, right? But what always happens in the third act?
Yeah, come roaring back.
And Moses of college hockey, right? His team refused to play. It was going to take a miracle to get them back on the ice. Well, he came up with this idea of we should have these 10 commandments to live by. Right. And the team never won a game. They had lost their top players to recruiting. It's a true story. Lost their players to a recruiting scandal that the college had. They never won a game, but they agreed it was the best season they ever had because they learned more about themselves, and they learned that anybody who's successful today didn't have an easy past. That with triumphing over adversity means much more than just numbers on a scoreboard. Right. And so, that was a case when I say everybody had their you, where we were with a young man who had nothing impressive to offer. And we finally said, talk to us, just forget it. Talk to us about something really, really fun going on at college right now. It could be building a picnic table for the sorority house next door. I don't know. Tell me something interesting rather than trying to impress me with your knowledge of advertising.
Yeah, I love that, because I think that's kind of the right mindset, probably in a lot of different places, not just say a job interview. They already know they want to hire someone. What they don't know is that they want to hire you, and it's your job to sort of inform them of that. And, I start my English class every year at the beginning. First thing we do is on the first day, I tell them that all communication is persuasive. And that if you're ever saying something, writing something, you're gesturing, and there isn't some reason for it, you either have gotten good over time that you don't have to think about it, or you're doing things sort of accidentally, and now you're leaving it up to luck. And I always say that people who get what they want more often in life without lying and without bullying are people who are making purposeful decisions. And so on the first day of class, my job is to convince them that all communication is persuasive. And if we can agree on that, everything goes better for the rest of the year, because every time we read something, it's not just, well, what did they say? Why did they say it that way? Right? It's not just, something about a main character. No. This is all done with purpose. And then that translates over to your own writing, your own speaking, that I'm doing all of these things purposefully. There's an outcome that I'm intending. And that doesn't require, to your point, a show of dominance. You don't have to be the person that, gives the handshake and turns the hand over hard. And, you can just be a human being in that room and have a conversation and bring yourself to close to equal footing with the interviewer without having to overstep your bounds. But that also means you don't have to always be on the defensive or sort of passively answering those questions. And to a certain extent, that requires some confidence, but confidence comes from knowing the story. You always tell the story better if you know what story you're trying to tell. when you think about this in advertising in general, how much of, say, either, what I just said or what you just said in terms of talking with students, how much of that is, say, the same or in common with the other work that you've done in advertising and marketing in the past? Like when it's human beings promoting themselves, is it essentially fundamentally the same thing that you're doing when you're promoting a product, or do we have to flip a couple switches in different directions because there's more of a human element? Like what's the carryover?
Yeah, it's fundamentally the same. So let's say you've got companies like Procter and Gamble, as a for instance, and they don't sell Tide. They've got 8 detergent brands. They've got 15 shampoo brands. And what they do is within their own company, they pit those individual businesses against each other. And what that does is it forces differentiation. And Procter and Gamble can't get to a 60 share of detergents by just having Tide. But if they can have 3 20 share brands, then they get to the same place. So, we're just sort of hardwired. The first question we ask is, okay, let's figure out what's in this bottle, right? Let's go to the R&D people. Let's figure out what's in the bottle. What's it made with? Where do those ingredients come from? I was part of a team that created the best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup. And for years, we called Folgers mountain grown coffee. Well, that came out of a briefing where we learned that coffee beans are grown on the mountainside, but they're grown on the north facing side of the mountain because that's where the shade is, because they can't be in the sun. So we said, so all coffee's grown on mountains, right? And I said, well, but nobody's saying that. So we're going to say Folgers mountain grown taste and aroma. I mean, it's still on the can to this day. So that just comes from, that's understanding you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. You got to know.
We were doing discovery, except we were doing the discovery in the halls of R&D. Now we do discovery with your own brand. What's going on inside you, right? What's your DNA? Let's understand that. And then, the other thing is people forget there's this whole other dynamic that goes on in the advertising business, which is the creative people come up with an interesting idea, and then you take it to the client. You've got to sell it to the client, right? It's really hard to convince these left-brained clients to buy these wacky ideas, right? I look at some of the wacky stuff on air and I say, that's fairly easy to create, right? Really hard to sell to a client. So that's the other thing we're doing day in, day out. We are selling our work. That has, I've got to go in and it's as much about selling me. They have to, if you can get a client that say, hey, Peter, this idea really makes me nervous, but you know what? You've never done wrong by us. The work that you bring us builds the business, builds our reputation. I'm going to take a chance on this because we can trust you. Well, that's the same kind of thing we're trying to do here, which is, when building your own brand, it's not just coming up with that story. It's figuring out what kind of person you are. And then once you know what kind of person you are, you can make choices about what kind of companies you want to be interviewing at. And for me, integrity was really, really important. That was something I wasn't going to sacrifice in my advertising career. And there's, I've always said, if I had a car and I was going to sell it and the mechanic had told me, it's only got 10,000 more miles and that transmission's going to go on it, right? Mm-hmm. I couldn't sell that car. But I know a lot of friends who work down on Wall Street that would sell you that car and then tell you when it broke, tell you, well, that's your fault because you didn't do your diligence.
Yeah.
Right. So I would never take anything to a client unless I was absolutely convinced that it was going to build their business. And there were a lot of creatives that wanted to get the crazy stuff produced so they could put it on their reel and get promoted. And that's, I'll be moving on to the next assignment. The fact that advertising didn't work won't be my problem.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, with that, I guess it's still similar because you're selling your services, your product to a client who's then going to take it to their client. Right. But in this case, I feel like sometimes that conversation, like it may not be different, but I think it feels different because first you have to get, say, your student to trust you, to buy into the process, to do all this. And then we've got to make sure that whatever we're creating, with that student, helping that student create their own story, we have to make sure that that's going to work for their quote unquote client, for their customer, which is the person that's going to hopefully hire them for the job. As you think about that sort of transferal between, how much research did you do on say hiring practices and things like that? Like, how did you get the information about what is essentially going to sell? Because I think to a certain extent, especially say with the career you've had, there comes a point where there's intuition and you just say like, I feel like this is a good story. These are things that are going to work. At what point did this become something that you can test? Like, do you have corporate partners where they let you peek at interviews, or how do you get to look into that process or into that room from their side to know that you're giving the best advice available?
Yeah, great question. We started with the supposition of what would be the worst dynamic that could exist in the corporate interviewing process that would make what we're proposing ill-advised, right? And so we went after some of these people we knew at these large companies, your Coca-Colas, your Procter and Gambles, and so forth, where their biggest goal in the hiring process is to take the subjectivity out of it, right? Try to have a process, a grading system that's objective, and so on and so forth. And then when you talk to them about that, they'd say, yeah, as objective and scientific as we try to make it, the deep, dirty little secret is the reality is it still comes down to tell me a little bit about yourself, right? That question is never going to go away. So to your point earlier about, with all of this parity that exists, right? This commoditization that exists. And by the time you get to that final cut, you're trying to be a brand manager on Coca-Cola. Can you imagine what kind of competition you're up against? So are you willing to just put your faith in that system and believe that the best person will win? I don't think so. But again, the reality is you don't know what you don't know. This was the foundation for our ad agency that catered to baby boomers. The average age of the client marketers who would hire us was 27, right? They have not lived their older years yet. They can't even possibly understand why there's joy in aging. Well, there's joy in aging that comes from the fact that you've stopped striving in life. You're content with who you are. Your life has meaning because your life experiences have given it meaning, right? You're brimming with confidence and capability. I got this, right? They can't relate to that because they haven't lived it yet. And so we're here telling these young people that, you've never interviewed before. Don't worry. It's just really awesome that you're here and you're willing to learn. You've been in learning mode, right? Your whole life, right? Don't shut that switch off now, right? But you know better than I do, Ryan, that people graduate from college and turn that switch off. I'm done.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we get a little too much of that. So I want to hit one of the big questions of the podcast here, because you just sort of talked about like shutting off the learning switch. And unfortunately, that probably happens a little too often. And for some people probably happens, before they've actually finished school, unfortunately. I like to ask people what they think sort of an ideal school would be. Right now, it sounds like a big part of this might have to do with knowing oneself or some of these communication strategies and things like that. But imagine for a moment that you were given the opportunity to run your own sort of educational institution. It could be, elementary school, high school, college, whatever you would want to do. But you get a budget and you get a campus of your choosing, could look any way you want. What to you would be an ideal school?
That's a great question. It's interesting. I'm going to start by saying it's going to be a boarding school. I'll circle back and tell you why I think it should be a boarding school. But within it being a boarding school, I'm a huge believer in I focus on the whole child, right? Which is arts, academic, athletics. And I'm going to add a fourth A, which I think has always been important, but I think really, really important in what I call the age of anxiety, right? All A's. Accountability is more important than ever. Being a marketer and so forth, some of the most fascinating years of my life were when my two children from my first marriage wanted to go to boarding school. So we toured the country with each child. So we ended up visiting 20 boarding schools, and they all have their pitch, right? They all have their story. They're all different. They're all for different kinds of boys and girls. Some were completely wrong for our kids, and they ended up going to one that served them really, really well. But, the old expression, if I knew then what I knew now, right? The older you get, the smarter you become. I can reflect back on that experience. And when I talk to other people who have kids that are entering their teenage years, I said, have you thought about sending them to boarding school? Well, no, I love my kids. I want them to be home with me. Right. I said, yeah, but you're making a choice that you're the best possible person to educate them. because you have a blood relationship with them. Talk to me about your experience raising teenagers. Oh, you've never done it. Okay. What I learned, and again, it was a different day and age, and I had children who were excited about going away. What I learned is that these boarding schools are professionals at raising teenagers and educating them, right? We defined educating before as potential, right? They do this year in, year out in an environment, right, where there's accountability, right? So that's that fourth A I added in there. And if you step out of line or you decide you want to do things this way versus that way, well, then there's going to be a consequence. There's also positive accountability. There's great reward that comes to that environment. But you're at home and you say to your teenager, if you talk to me that way again, I'm kicking you out of the house. Go ahead. I'd be happy to leave.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's that age-old thing about don't be willing to enforce anything that you can't follow through on, right? So I think that it's a really, really important time for parents who are getting closer and closer to their kids to be smart enough to say, maybe I need to step back for these critical foundational years. So, there was one school in particular, the school would have to have an advertising program, right, Ryan?
Yeah, well, I would assume, right?
Yeah. The one that stands out to this day, and I think of myself that way, I encourage my children to think of themselves this way, was the Westminster School in Connecticut. They have a belief that they're all about teaching their students grit with grace. And, grit is a great word. It's a little bit of that go as far as you can with all that you've got that I spoke about. But I just think grace is a beautiful skill. Both of us talked about the importance of a better child, a more rounded child. I don't know, everybody now is so focused on school as academics and grades. Imagine handing your child off to a school that was going to help them be a driven person, but a person who was driven in a way that had great grace.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's great. And there's been this over the last few years, there's been this big push for SEL, social emotional learning. Last summer, I spoke to the CEO of a woman who runs a company. Then that's their whole deal. They serve over 1 million students across the country, providing school services to help students sort of learn how to manage social interactions and understand their own emotions. And, I think it's important for everybody just practicing mindfulness. And I think that a program like that is probably particularly useful when you're younger to sort of help you build some of the tools that you're going to need as you grow up and say as anxiety builds towards the end of high school and things like that. But, when you first said boarding school, I was like, my brain split and I immediately was like pros, cons. And the pros are, obvious in terms of you're in a strong setting. There's a lot of structure, especially if you've chosen to go there, but then we have all these concerns about, I'm removed from family and all this kind of stuff. I really think that to an extent, you could make the argument that, say, something like social emotional learning or doing some of this, helping a person be well-rounded. I'm not going to say it's better, but it's probably more easily achieved at a boarding school because you can control more of that context. I see a kid 90 minutes every other day, they're in all these other classes and then they turn around and they go home and God knows what environment they're in at home. Right. And so say in that boarding environment where you're there, you really can craft a culture that can really contribute to young people beyond just the academics or beyond, say, the athletic piece. I've never probably given you're the first person that's given that answer. I've done.
Well, there's a bias to think of them as elitist institutions, and it's my dad went to a boarding school, and it was a teeny little boarding school you've never heard of in a cold corner of Maine, and he was a first in his farm family to be educated, and he went from that teeny little boarding school on to Cornell. So, but I'll never forget arriving at Trinity College and as a freshman and so forth. And all of a sudden my roommates come in. It took them an hour to unpack, get set up, and then boom, they were going 60 miles an hour. This was just another school year away from home for them. And so I spent most of college chasing those boarding school kids trying to catch up. And my kids to this day say that the best education they got were those years at boarding school.
Yeah.
Education, again, being defined broadly in terms of how it prepared them for life, and the social education and the foundational years.
I love it. Yeah. And it really is, because I mean, a lot of my ideas about how we could improve high school would really have to do with what we already do in college, that you create this environment and you do provide a degree of choice and things like that. And so, boarding school lets you do the whole package a little bit earlier. So I think there's definitely a benefit there. So I want to hit on one idea you mentioned quickly, and it just came up again in the boarding school thing, and then we're going to get ready to wrap this thing up. But you did mention both early and then again about sort of the interplay between athletics and academics. And I'm just curious, as someone who has had a strong academic career and then a strong professional career, and you've referenced being a father, et cetera, in your mind, how important is, say, athletic participation, or maybe, we can broaden to other extracurriculars as well, but why is that so significant for you that it's come up a few times?
Yeah, I can look at that question through the lens of what athletics mean for me. What do they mean for my kids? But I'm going to put all of those experiences collectively into this bucket of sports was a critical vehicle for helping me and all of my children and friends and their children discover their thing, right? That having something that when people say, "Oh, tell me about yourself," you say, "Well, I'm a soccer player," right? And we could have a whole other podcast about where does self-esteem come from? How is it built at these critical ages? It's this sense of self-identity. Who am I? And so it's very easy for most kids to define themselves in the context of that activity, that athletic activity that absorbs so much time in their day. So that's, asset number one. Asset number two is, now that you're playing that sport, well, now you're in a team dynamic. Guess what? Just about anything you're going to do in your life is going to involve some team context. And there are going to be things in that where there's a bad apple. There always is. How are you going to deal with that bad apple? How are you going to deal with a coach who's overly authoritative? How are you going to inspire yourself? How do you get your best potential out of it? There's learning about winning and losing, right? We all joke now that everybody gets a participation award. So that all of these huge life lessons that play out in this microcosm called athletics. There's the whole other thing about the science behind physical activity combined with learning, and how exercise, especially with boys, helps them be better learners, attention span. So there's just a lot going on there. And I hesitated to offer that up as a point of view because it seems so shallow about, hey, it's all about sports. But I think if you really peel the layers back from the onion and look about what that deeper thing called athletics and teams and personal challenge and overcoming adversity and winning and losing, those are massive life lessons learned at an early age.
I love it. Yeah. And I fully agree. As someone, I played a lot of sports growing up and through high school, and I was never bad at any of them, but I was probably never great at them either. I was very serviceable, but like I knew,
there's a story of versatility in there,
yeah,
Ryan.
Yeah. But hey, by the beginning of high school, I realized, I'm probably not going to be doing any of these things in college, but that wasn't a deterrent to me because that wasn't why I was doing them in the first place. And I do think for some kids, say, band or drama or whatever, there's other things that provide some of that stuff, but I agree. There's a degree of both competition and sort of a goal-oriented outcome that athletics provides that's really important. And I try to tell that to parents sometimes that, it's great for your kid to be involved, but it's also great for you to remember your kid doesn't have to win the state championship or make the all-star team. Like, as long as that kid, no one can reasonably ask you for better than your best. And so as long as you said, as long as you're doing the best you can with what God gave you, then that's really all we can ask you for. But man, you learn a lot about yourself and maybe some of your friends along the way. So I wanted to ask, clarify, because it came up a couple times. So I love it. So, all right. We've got 2 items left. One is going to be the general books and movies recommendations, which is a little bit just for fun. It gives a sense of maybe what you're into or you think people should check out. But before we run into that, I always want to give a moment of open mic. So if there's anything that maybe we didn't talk about that you wanted to, or we talked about, but maybe I moved on too fast or something like that, is there anything that you would like to clarify or add to the conversation for listeners that we didn't get to?
No, we're good.
Man, I'm good. I love it. All right. So then whether it's professional or personal, it could be a mix of both. Some people give me, school books, and some people give me their favorite baseball movies, whatever you like. What are a few books and movies that you would recommend that you think listeners would appreciate or should check out?
A book idea that's a lot of fun. And again, I told you before, I'm a baby boomer. So I think all of my books and movies I'm going to talk about are going to be vintage. But I think it's really important every now and then to go back in time. This was a book that in all of his years, my father only told me to read one book. And he came to me one day and said, "Hey, you probably don't listen to everything I tell you to, but you really ought to sit down and read this book." And I'm sure you're familiar with it, Ryan, but it's going to be consistent with my boarding school comment earlier. And it's The Headmaster by John McPhee.
Okay, I've heard of. I have not read it. I've heard of it.
Yeah, he wrote it in 1966, and it was a book you could blow through it very quickly, and it is a book that will not leave you. It profiles the founder and longtime headmaster of Deerfield Academy, Frank Boyden, who started that small little scrubby school in 1902, was the headmaster for 66 years. He would go out into the fields and where the young boys were digging potatoes, and he'd beg them to come to school. He was the kind of guy who set up his desk right in the front hall of the school building so he could see every one of his boys. It was, again, an all-boys school at the time. See every one of his boys. He could tell from their deportment and their demeanor whether something was on their mind. He'd pull them aside. He knew every boy inside and out. He was also just a prolific writer. He would write upwards of 100 letters a day. He would get by in very little sleep, but everything he did for 66 years was all about better boys. Where this gets really interesting is where I weave my father into it and why he told me to read it. He, as I told you, he grew up on a dairy farm in Connecticut. His mother was a teacher, and her mother wanted the best for him as the oldest boy. And so she took it upon herself to write to Frank Boyden at Deerfield and apply my dad, Herb, apply him for school. And she got a letter back from Frank Boyden saying, "Dear Catherine, thanks for applying on Herb's behalf, but unfortunately, our class for next year is already full. I would have loved to have had Herb as part of the class. He seems like an upstanding young gentleman. I've taken the liberty, I hope you don't mind, of forwarding his paperwork on to a good friend of mine who's the headmaster at Hebron Academy in Maine. And I think it would be a great fit for Herb and whatever." So, of course, you didn't mess with his mother. She said, "Well, that's where you're going to school then." And my father went off to Hebron Academy and, was captain of all of his sports teams and went on to Cornell. And here's the fun part of the story. All throughout his years at Hebron Academy and subsequently throughout all 4 years of Cornell, Frank Boyden from Deerfield corresponded with him to see how he was doing.
Wow.
So it's just a great story, a throwback story of an epic educator. So I would encourage anybody to read it. It is still being published.
That's great. Yeah. That's making it on my personal read list. That sounds awesome. All right. It's The Headmaster. Any others, books or movies? That's a good one.
No, I'll just, just completely outside of the educational realm. One of the greatest adventure books I've ever read is called The Emerald Mile by Kevin Fedarko. And it's he has this ability to, in one book, basically, there's 5 books, 5 different stories that all intermingle with each other. But the book is presented as the exhilarating true story of an epic attempt to capture the speed record for the fastest trip through the Grand Canyon by boat. And Powell, right, before there were any dams on the Grand Canyon, and Powell was exploring that area for the first time, Powell set the record because you had epic flow levels going on in the Colorado River, so they could get down the river pretty quickly. Then they put 2 dams in, and suddenly, right, you're never going to get those flow levels again. So nobody ever thought those records would be broken. Well, the Glen Canyon Dam was built, and it took 30 years to fill. They finally got it full, and there was an El Nino event. And so the water level started to rise, and the Glen Canyon Dam was compromised. So the only thing they could do was to release massive amounts of water through the dam. But while they did that, the dam itself started to get eviscerated. So there's a very real risk that the Colorado, all of the Lake Mead there behind the Glen Canyon Dam was going to end up in the Sea of Cortez. And so throughout all of this, you're learning about the Grand Canyon, the geomorphology of the Canyon. You're learning about Powell and his famous trips of discovery. You're learning about how rapids work and how you navigate rapids when you're in a boat. And in the midst of all this craziness, these two guys decide they can take advantage of these insane flow levels to set the record.
Of all the things to be thinking about, you're like, this is my moment.
Got so much going on.
That's cool. That sounds awesome. Yeah, no, hey, that's great. That's a good balance too. We got an education book and something for fun. That sounds fantastic. All right. Well, Peter, I appreciate you taking the time to speak today. Great discussion. A lot of cool ideas there. And as I said, I'm well over 60 episodes of this podcast now, and you're the first person that brought a couple of these into the discussion. So I appreciate you sharing the perspective, both on what you're doing with Apply U, also maybe some of the benefits of boarding schools and similar settings, things like that. All that's fantastic. And that these are things that haven't been part of the show before, but maybe we'll pop up again, because now I've fodder for additional questions in the future. So everyone, we've been speaking with Peter Hubbell, the CEO of Apply U. He is offering an amazing service, and you're getting started this month, right? We're launching May 2021. So helping recent college graduates to create a personal brand and find their place in the professional world. So it's both well timed and I think well designed. So I'll be really eager to see how this is going to play out for you. Peter, thank you very much again for taking the time to speak today.
Thank you, Ryan. It's a pleasure.
All right, fantastic. So this has been the ClassCast Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. You can find the ClassCast Podcast on all major streaming services, plus on YouTube and at classcastpodcast.com. Thank you very much and have a great day.